We're back today to keep going with the story of the Three Musketeers. So, just to summarize what happened the last time. So, what we had is we're at the beginning of the book, so we're now reading the chapter 4. And so we're following D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan is a young guy living in the south of France, and he went to Paris to enter in the Musketeer, but he lost his recommendation letter, which has been stolen on the way. And so he went to the Musketeer. He met for the first time the three Musketeers called Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. That will be the famous Three Musketeers. He just saw that they were um, they were in the office of Monsieur de Tréville, who is managing the whole Musketeer and King's Guard in general, and so they seem to be already very famous as a musketeer. Athos was heavily wounded during a fight that they had, and then D'Artagnan talked with Monsieur de Tréville, and Monsieur de Tréville told him that he could not enter just like that. The musketeer, he needed to um, first prove himself in other fights and other divisions. And suddenly the talk between them stopped, and because D'Artagnan apparently saw the guy who stole his letter, his recommendation letter, and ran after him. In the meanwhile, during the discussion, Monsieur de Tréville asked himself if D'Artagnan was a very honest and brave man, as he seems to be, or if he might be a spy from the Cardinal, which is with because they don't really have very good relationship between the Cardinal and Monsieur de Tréville. So we're now probably following D'Artagnan running after the thief of his recommendation letter. Chapter 4: The shoulder of Athos, the baldric of Porthos, and the handkerchief of Aramis. D'Artagnan, in a kingdom of fury, crossed the antechamber at 3 bounds, and was darting in the direction of the stairs, which he reckoned upon descending 4 at a time, when, in his heedless route, he ran head primary towards a musketeer, who began popping out of one in every of Monsieur de Tréville's personal rooms, and striking his shoulder violently, made him utter a cry, or, as a substitute, a howl. "Excuse me," stated D'Artagnan, endeavoring to renew his course. "Excuse me, but I'm in a rush." Scarcely had he descended the first stair, while a hand of iron seized him through the belt and stopped him. "You are in a hurry," stated the musketeer, as light as a sheet. "Under that pretence you run against me. You say, 'Excuse me,' and also you believe this is sufficient? Not at all, young man. Do you fancy because you've got heard Monsieur de Tréville speak to us a bit cavalierly these days that different people are to deal with us as he speaks to us? Undeceive yourself, comrade. You aren't Monsieur de Tréville." My faith," responded D'Artagnan, spotting Athos, who, after the dressing accomplished through the doctor, became returning to his personal rental. "I did now not do it deliberately, and now not doing it intentionally, I stated 'Excuse me.' It seems to me that this is pretty sufficient. I repeat to you, however, and this time on my phrase of honor, I think possibly too often, that I am in haste, notable haste. Leave your maintain, then, I beg of you, and permit me cross where my commercial enterprise calls me." "Monsieur," stated Athos, letting him cross, "you aren't polite. It is straightforward to perceive that you come from a distance." D'Artagnan had already strode down 3 or 4 stairs. However, at Athos' last remark he stopped short. "Morbleu, monsieur," stated he, "however some distance I may additionally come, it isn't always you who can provide me a lesson in proper manners, I warn you." "Perhaps," said Athos. "Ah, if I had been no longer in such haste, and if I have been no longer going for walks after some one," stated D'Artagnan. "Monsieur, man in a hurry, You can discover me without strolling me, you recognize? And in which, I pray you? Near the Camp de Chaux. At what hour? About noon. About midday. That will do. I can be there. Endeavour no longer to make me wait. For a sector past 12 I will reduce off your ears as you run. Good, cried D'Artagnan. I can be there 10 minutes before 12. And he activated strolling as though the devil possessed him, hoping that he might yet discover the stranger whose slow tempo could not have carried him far. So now we have the first encounter between Athos and D'Artagnan. And because D'Artagnan was a bit rude with Athos, who was wounded, they ended up. So the discussion, they agreed to meet at noon in a specific place, and usually that means they defeated they asked themselves if they agree to fight in a duel. So the duels, like I said previously in another stream, duels are illegal at this time in France, but that's relatively common to still have some hidden duel that will happen. It's just very important for the people not to get caught when they do duel, but that's still relatively common, at least in this story. But at the road gate, Porthos turned into speaking with the soldier on defend. Between the two talkers there was just enough room for a man to skip. D'Artagnan notioned it would suffice for him, and he sprang forwards like a dart among them. But D'Artagnan had reckoned without the wind. As he became approximately to bypass, the wind blew out Porthos' long cloak, and D'Artagnan rushed instantly into the middle of it. Without doubt, Porthos had reasons for no longer forsaking this part of his vestment, for as opposed to quitting his maintain on the flap in his hand, he pulled it closer to him, so that D'Artagnan rolled himself up inside the velvet through a movement of rotation defined by the persistency of Porthos. D'Artagnan, listening to the Musketeer swear, wanted to break out from the cloak, which blinded him, and thought to find his manner from below the folds of it. He turned into specially stressful to keep away from marring the freshness of the fantastic baldric we're acquainted with. However, on timidly commencing his eyes, he located himself with his nose fixed between the two shoulders of Porthos. This is to mention precisely upon the baldric. Alas, like most things on this world which don't have anything of their choose however appearances, the baldric was glittering with gold within the front, however changed into nothing however easy buff behind. Vaingloriously as he changed into, Porthos couldn't afford to have a baldric absolutely of gold, but had at the least half. One may want to understand the necessity of the bloodless and the urgency of the cloak. So what happened just right now is that we had in the previous stream we met Porthos, uh, who was just having a new baldric, so a new protection, full of gold, and he was very proud of it and explaining to everyone how expensive that was and how proud he was. But now um, because D'Artagnan kind of went into his cloak, what we discover is that the back of the baldric is just very, very poor because Porthos couldn't afford this fancy baldric and he just bought half of it. And then he put like a big cloak and pretended he was a bit sick, so that people wouldn't notice that he just got half of it. So now Porthos' disguise has been found. "Bless me!" cried Porthos, making steady efforts to disembarrass himself of D'Artagnan, who became wriggling about his again. "You ought me to be mad to run against human beings on this manner." "Excuse me," stated D'Artagnan, reappearing beneath the shoulder of the giant, "but I am in such haste. I turned into going for walks after a person, and—" "And do you always neglect your eyes while you run?" asked Porthos. "No," spoke back D'Artagnan, piqued, "and thanks to my eyes, I can see what different people cannot see." Whether Porthos understood him, or did now not apprehend him. Giving manner to his anger, "Monsieur," stated he, "you stand a risk of getting chastised in case you rob musketeers on this fashion." "Chastised, monsieur?" said D'Artagnan. "The expression is powerful." "It is one that will become a man acquainted with appearance his enemies inside the face." "Ah, pardieu! I recognize full properly which you don't flip your back to yours." And the younger man, overjoyed along with his funny story, went away laughing loudly. Porthos foamed with rage and made a movement to rush after D'Artagnan. "Presently, presently!" cried the latter, "while you haven't your cloak on." "At 1 o'clock, then, behind the Luxembourg." "Very well, at 1 o'clock, then," replied D'Artagnan, turning the perspective of the road. But neither in the road he had passed via, nor in the one which his eager look betrayed, ought he see any one, but slowly the stranger had walked. He was long past on his way, or perhaps had entered some house. D'Artagnan inquired of everybody he met with, went right down to the ferry, came up once more with the aid of the Rue de Seine and the Red Cross. However, nothing, without a doubt, nothing. This chase became but wonderful to him in a single sense, for his share, because the perspiration broke from his brow, his heart started to cool. So now we encounter Porthos. Yes, Porthos, and once again, Porthos and D'Artagnan agree on having a duel. This time, the next day, not at noon, because noon is already busy with Athos, but at 1. So just after the duel with Athos, he has another duet with Porthos at 1 o'clock. So the days start to be busy for tomorrow. He started to mirror upon the activities that had surpassed. There were several and inauspicious. It changed into scarcely 11 o'clock inside the morning, and yet this morning had already introduced him into shame with Monsieur de Tréville, who couldn't fail to assume the way wherein D'Artagnan had left him the touch cavalier. Besides this, he had drawn upon himself 2 correct duels with guys, each capable of killing 3 D'Artagnan, with 2 Musketeers, in brief, with of this being whom he esteemed so greatly that he positioned them in his thoughts and heart especially other men. The outlook turned into unhappy. Sure of being killed via Athos, it is able to effortlessly be understood that the young guy became not very uneasy approximately Porthos. As hope but is the final component extinguished within the heart of Guy, he completed via hoping that he may live to tell the tale, despite the fact that with horrible wounds in each these duels, and in case of surviving, he made the following reprehensions upon his very own behavior. What a madcap I was, and what a silly fellow I am! That courageous and unfortunate Athos become wounded on that very shoulder towards which I should run head foremost like a ram. The handiest aspect that astonishes me is that he did not strike me lifeless straight away. He had right purpose to do so. The ache I gave him need to were atrocious. As to Porthos, religion, that's a droll affair. And regardless of himself, the young guy became to chortle around, searching spherical cautiously, however, to look that in his solitary snort, without a reason within the eyes of passers-by using, indignant no one. As to Porthos, that is in really droll, but I am no longer the much less a giddy idiot. Are human beings to be run towards without caution? No. And have I any right to move and peep below their cloaks to look what isn't there? He might have pardoned me, he could surely have pardoned me, if I had no longer said whatever to him approximately that cursed Badrick. In a biggish words, it is authentic. However, as an alternative drolly ambiguous. Ah, cursed Gascon that I am! I get from one harbor into some others. Friend D'Artagnan, he, talking to himself with all the amenity that he ideaed you himself. If you escape, of which there isn't always a lot threat, I might recommend you to exercise best politeness for the destiny. You have to henceforth be prominent and quote as a version of it. To be obliging and polite does now not always make a man a coward. Look at Aramis now. Aramis is mildness and grace personified. Well, did every person ever dream of calling Aramis a coward? No, in reality no longer, and from this second I would enterprise to model myself after him. Ah, that's peculiar. Here it is. D'Artagnan, strolling and soliloquizing, had arrived inside a few steps of the resort d'Arguillon, and in the front of that inn perceived Aramis, chatting gaily with three gents. But as he had now not forgotten that it became in presence of this younger man that Monsieur de Tréville were so indignant within the morning, and as a witness of the rebuke the Musketeers had acquired was no longer in all likelihood to be in any respect agreeable, he pretended not to see him. D'Artagnan, on the contrary, pretty full of his plans of conciliation and courtesy, approached the young man with a profound bow, accompanied by using a maximum gracious smile. All four, except, right away broke off their conversation. D'Artagnan became not so dull as now not to perceive that he became one too many. However, he changed into now not sufficiently damaged into the fashions of the world to realize how to extricate himself gallantly from a fake function. Like that of a person who starts to mingle with people he is scarcely acquainted with, and in a conversation that does not issue him. He became in charge of in his mind, then, for the least awkward methods of retreat, when he remarked that Aramis had allowed his handkerchief to fall, and by means of mistake, no doubt, had positioned his foot upon him. That this appeared to be a favourable possibility to repair his intrusion. He stooped, and, with the maximum gracious air he should assume, drew the handkerchief from below the foot of the musketeer, despite the efforts the latter made to detain it, and, holding it out to him, said, "I believe, monsieur, that is a handkerchief you'll be sorry to lose." The handkerchief became indeed richly embroidered, and had a coronet and hands at one of its corners. Aramis blushed excessively, and snatched in place of took the handkerchief from the hand of the Gascon. "Aha!" cried one of the guards. "Will you persist in saying, Maximum discreet Aramis, that you are not on proper phrase with Madame de Bois Tracy, when that gracious female has the kindness to lend you certainly one of her handkerchiefs?" Aramis darted at D'Artagnan one of these appears which tell a person that he has acquired a mortal enemy. Then, resuming his moderate air, "You are deceived, gentlemen," said he. "This handkerchief isn't mine, and I cannot fancy why monsieur has taken it into his head to provide it to me in preference to consider one of you. And as a proof of what I say, right here is mine in my pocket." So, announcing, he pulled out his personal handkerchief, like was a very elegant handkerchief, and of pleasant cambric, though cambric changed into pricey on the length. However, a handkerchief without embroidery and without palms, most effective ornamented with a single cipher, that of its proprietor. This time D'Artagnan was now not hasty. He perceived his mistake. However, the pals of Aramis had been in no way convinced by using his denial, and one in every of them addressed the young musketeer with affected seriousness. "If it was as you thought it far," said he, I should be compelled, my pricey Aramis, to reclaim it myself, for, as you very well recognize, Bois is an intimate friend of mine, and I cannot permit the asset of his wife to be sported as a trophy." "You make the demand badly," responded Aramis, "and, while acknowledging the justice of your reclamation, I refuse it due to the shape." "The reality is," hazarded D'Artagnan timidly, "I did now not see the handkerchief fall from the pocket of Monsieur Aramis. He had his foot upon it, that is all, and I idea from having his foot it Upon it the handkerchief turned into his. "And you have been deceived, my dear sir," answered Aramis coldly, little or no practical to the reparation. Then, turning closer to that one of the guards who had declared himself the pal of Bois Tracy, "Beside," added he, "I even have meditated my expensive intimate of Bois Tracy, that I am no longer less tenderly his pal than you can probably be, so that decidedly this handkerchief is as possibly to have fallen out of your pocket as mine." "No, upon my honor!" cried his Majesty's guardsman. "You are approximately to swear upon your honor, and I upon my word, and then it will likely be pretty obvious that one of us may have lied. Now, here, Montaran, we can do higher than that. Allow each take a half of the handkerchief?" "Yes." "Perfectly simply," cried the other guardsman. "The judgment of King Solomon. Aramis, you certainly are complete of awareness." The young guys burst into a laugh, and, as can be intended, the affair had no sequel. In a second or the communication ceased, and three guardsmen and the musketeer, after having cordially shaken arms, separated, the guardsman going one manner and Aramis another. "Now is my time to make peace with this gallant guy," said D'Artagnan to himself, having stood on one side at some point of the complete of the latter a part of the communique, and with this right feeling drawing near to Aramis, who turned into departing without paying any interest to him. "Monsieur," said he, "you'll excuse me, I wish—" "Ah, monsieur," interrupted Aramis, "allow me to study to you that you have not acted on this affair as a gallant guy ought." "What, monsieur!" cried Aramis, "and do you assume—" "I suppose, monsieur, that you are not a fool, and that you knew thoroughly, despite the fact that coming from Gascony, that people do no longer tread upon handkerchief without a cause. What the Satan! Paris isn't always paved with cambric." "Monsieur, you act wrongly in endeavoring to mortify me," stated D'Artagnan, in whom the herbal quarrelsome spirit began to speak more loudly than his pacific resolutions. "I am from Gascony, it is actual, and because you comprehend it, there is no even to tell you that Gascons aren't very affected persons, so that once they have begged to be excused once, have been it even for a folly, they may be satisfied that they have achieved already as a minimum as plenty again as they ought to have accomplished." "Monsieur, what I say to you approximately the matter," stated Aramis, "isn't for the sake of seeking a quarrel. Thank God, I am not a bravo, and being a musketeer, however, for some time, I must effectively fight when I am forced to do so, and usually with amazing repugnance. However, this time the affair is critical, for here is a woman compromised with the aid of you." "By us, you suggest?" cried D'Artagnan. Why did you so maladroitly restore me the handkerchief? Why did you so awkwardly allow it to fall? I even have stated, monsieur, and I repeat, that the handkerchief did now not fall from my pocket." "And thereby you've got lied twice, monsieur, for I saw it fall." "Ah, you're taking it with that tone, do you, Master Gascon? Well, I will train you how to behave yourself. And I will send you again for your mass book, Master Abbé. Draw, in case you please, and instantly—" "Not so, in case you please, my friend, not right here at the least. Do you not understand that we're opposite the Hôtel d'Arguillon, that's full of the cardinal's creatures? How do I understand that this is not his eminence who has honored you with the commission you got my head? Now, I entertain a daft partiality for my head. It appears to match my shoulders so efficiently. I want to kill you. Be at relaxation as to that. However, to kill you quietly, in a comfortable, far-away vicinity, wherein you may not be capable of boast of your loss of life to all and sundry." "I agree, monsieur, but do now not be too assured. Take your handkerchief, whether or not it belongs to you or every other. You may possibly stand in need of it. Monsieur is a Gascon? Yes, monsieur. Yes. Monsieur does not longer delay an interview through prudence. Prudence, monsieur, is a distinctive feature, sufficiently useless to musketeers, I recognize, but quintessential to churchmen, and as I am most effective a musketeer provisionally, I maintain it appropriate to be prudent. At 2 o'clock I shall have the honour of looking forward to you at the hotel of Monsieur de Treville. There I will illustrate to you the excellent place and time. So now we have the final encounter between Aramis and D'Artagnan. And yeah, D'Artagnan wanted to be nice and he was like, "Oh, you let your handkerchief fall." But the handkerchief is actually from a lady, from another lady. So Aramis was compromised in front of other people. And so that's how D'Artagnan ended up having his duel at 2 p.m. With Aramis. So he has now Athos at noon and Porthos at 1 and Aramis at 2 p.m. So he needs to go through 3 duels and there is almost no chance he might come out of this alive because they are all three very, very um, experienced swordsmen. The young men bowed and separated. Aramis, ascending the road which brought about the Luxembourg, whereas D'Artagnan, perceiving the appointed hour became approaching, took the street to the Carme de Chaux, pronouncing to himself, "Decidedly, I can't draw back. However, at the least, if I am killed, I shall be killed by a musketeer." That's the end of the chapter 4. Mhm. Okay, so let's have a look at the chapter 5. I think I will go through the chapter 5. It should take 30 minutes and then I will stop. Chapter 5: The King's Musketeers and the Cardinal's Guards, which, I repeat, are both kind of enemy. D'Artagnan became familiar with no one in Paris. He went therefore to his appointment with Athos without atude, determined to be happy with the ones his adversary should pick out. Yeah, so the what he mentions is when you go into a duel with someone, you usually bring 2 people that can witness the duel and that can witness that the other person was killed in a proper duel environment and that this is then legit. But because D'Artagnan knows no one in Paris, he's like, okay, I'm just gonna pick the same 2 people that the other person that Athos will bring, and that's all because I don't know anyone that I can use as witness for myself. Besides, his intention was formed to make the brave musketeer all appropriate apologies, however without meanness or weak spot, fearing that would result from this duel which normally consequences from an affair of this type, while a young and energetic guy fights with an adversary who is wounded and weakened. If conquered, he doubles the triumph of his antagonist. If a conqueror, he is accused of foul play and want of courage. Oh yeah, because the first, so Athos is still very very wounded, so he feels a bit bad of fighting with Athos and yeah, of his reputation. Even if he wins, he would win against him. Um, Now we must have badly painted the character of our Johnny Seeker. Our readers ought to have already perceived that D'Artagnan changed into no longer an irregular guy. Consequently, even as repeating to himself that his dying changed into inevitable, he did not make up his thoughts to die quietly, as one less brave and much less confined may have accomplished in his place. He reflected upon the specific characters of those with whom he turned into going to combat, and began to view his scenario extra truly. He hoped, by using loyal excuses, to make a pile of Athos, whose lordly air and austere bearing pleased him plenty. He flattered himself he must be able to frighten Porthos with the adventure of the baldric, which he might, if not killed upon the spot, relate to each person a recital which, properly managed, would cover Porthos with ridicule. As to the astute of Aramis, he did no longer entertain Tons's dread of him, and, supposing he needs to be capable of get to his point, he determined to dispatch him in top fashion, or, as a minimum, via hitting him inside the face, as Caesar encouraged his squaddies to do those of Pompey, to harm all the time the beauty of which he was so proud. In addition to this, D'Artagnan possessed that invincible inventory of decision which the counsels of his father had implanted in his coronary heart. Endure not anything from everybody, however, the king, the cardinal, and Monsieur de Tréville. He flew then, rather than walked, towards the convent of the Carme Deschaux, or, as an alternative Deschaux, as it changed into known as at length, a kind of constructing without a window, surrounded through barren fields, an accent to the Proclair, and which turned into typically employed because the region for the duels of men who had no time to lose. When D'Artagnan arrived in sight of the naked spot of floor which prolonged alongside the foot of the monastery, Athos were ready approximately 5 minutes, and 12 o'clock became hanging. He became then as punctual as the Samaritan girl, and the most rigorous casuist with regard to duels may want who don't have anything to say. Athos, who nevertheless suffered grievously from his wound, although it had been dressed anew through Monsieur de Tréville's health-care professional, was seated on a summit, and looking forward to his adversary with hat in hand, his feather even touching the ground. "Monsieur," stated Athos, "I have engaged of my pals as seconds, but those two friends aren't but come, at which I am astonished, because it isn't always at all their custom." "I don't have any seconds on my part, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, "for having best arrived the day before today in Paris, as I but realized no one but Monsieur de Tréville, to whom I changed into advocated through my father, who has the honor to be, in a few degrees, certainly one of his pals." Athos reflected for on the spot. "You know nobody but Monsieur de Tréville?" he requested. "Yes, monsieur, I understand handy as him." "Well, but then," continued Athos, speaking half to himself, "if I kill you, I shall have the air of a boy slayer." "Not too much so," spoke back D'Artagnan, with a bow that became not deficient in dignity, "because you do me the honor to draw a sword with me at the same time as affected by a wound which may be very inconvenient." "Very inconvenient, upon my phrase, and as you also you harm me devilishly, I can tell you. But I will take the left hand. It is my custom in such instances. Do now not fancy that I do you a favor. I use both hands without difficulty, and it will be likely be even a disadvantage to you. A left-passed guy may be very difficult to folks that aren't organized for it. I remorse I did not inform you quicker of this condition." "You have sincerely, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, bowing again, "a courtesy for which, I guarantee you, I am very thankful." "You confuse me," responded Athos, together with his gentlemanly air. "Allow us to talk of something else, if you please. Ah, how you have got harm me! My shoulder quite burns." "If you will allow me," said D'Artagnan with timidity. "What, monsieur?" "I have an awesome balsam for wounds, a balsam given to me via my mother, and of which I actually have made an ordeal upon myself." "Well?" "Well, I am certain that during less than 3 days this balsam could remedy you, and at the give up of 3 days, when you will be cured, nicely, sir, it might none the less do me a first-rate honor to be your man." D'Artagnan spoke those phrases with a simplicity that did honor to his courtesy, without throwing the least doubt upon his braveness. "Pardieu, monsieur," stated Athos, "that's a proposition that pleases me. Now, not that I can accept it, but a league off it savors of the gentleman. They spoke and acted the gallant knights of the time of Charlemagne, in whom each cavalier needs to seek his model. Unfortunately, we do now not stay within the times of the wonderful emperor. We live within the times of the cardinal, and 3 days consequently, however nicely the name of the game is probably guarded, it would be acknowledged, I say, that we were to combat, and our fight might be prevented. I suppose those fellows will by no means come." "If you're in haste, monsieur," said D'Artagnan, with the equal simplicity with which a moment before he had proposed to him to eliminate the duel for 3 days, "and if it's your will to dispatch me without delay, do now not inconvenience yourself, I pray you." "There is another phrase which pleases me," cried D'Artagnan, with a gracious nod to cried Athos, with a gracious nod to D'Artagnan, "that did now not come from a man without a heart. Monsieur, I love guys of your kidney. I foresee, it seems, that if we don't kill each different, I shall hereafter have a lot of pride for your conversation. We will look forward to these gentlemen, so please you. I have lots of time, and it is going to be more correct. Oh, right here is one in every of them, I consider." In reality, at the end of the Rue Vaugirard, the enormous Porthos regarded. "What!" cried D'Artagnan. "Is your first witness Monsieur Porthos?" "Yes. That disturbs you?" "By no means." "And here is the second." D'Artagnan became within the path pointed to by using Athos, and perceived Aramis. "What!" cried he, in an accessory of more astonishment than before, "your 2D witness is Monsieur Aramis?" "Doubtless. Are you now not aware that we are by no means visible one without the others, and that we're called a few of the Musketeers and the Guards at court room and in the metropolis, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, or the three inseparables, and yet, as you return from Dax or Pau—" "From Tarbes," said D'Artagnan. "It is possible you are ignorant of this little truth," said Athos. "My religion," responded D'Artagnan, "you're properly named, gentlemen, and my adventure, if it must make any noise, will prove at least that your union isn't always founded upon contrast." In the interim, Porthos had arisen, waved his hand to Athos, and then, turning in the direction of D'Artagnan, stood pretty astonished. Let us say in passing that he had changed his baldric and relinquished his cloak. "Aha!" stated he, "and what does this suggest?" "This is the gentleman I am going to combat with," stated Athos, pointing to D'Artagnan with his hand and saluting him with the same gesture. "Why, it's far with him I am additionally going to combat," stated Porthos. "But not earlier than 1 o'clock," answered D'Artagnan. "And I also am to combat with this gentleman," said Aramis, coming in his turn into the region. "But now not till 2 o'clock," said D'Artagnan, with the identical calmness. "But what are you going to combat approximately, Athos?" asked Aramis. "Faith, I don't thoroughly realize. He hurt my shoulder. And you, Porthos?" "Faith, I am going to fight because I am going to fight," spoke back Porthos, reddening. Athos, whose eager eye misplaced nothing, perceived a faintly sly smile pass over the lips of the young Gascon as he replied, "We had a quick discussion upon get dressed." "And you, Aramis?" asked Athos. "Oh, ours is a theological quarrel," answered Aramis, creating a sign to D'Artagnan to keep mystery the purpose of the duel. Athos indeed noticed a 2D smile on the lips of D'Artagnan. Indeed? Yes, a passage of Saint Augustine upon which we could not agree, said the Gascon. Decidedly, this is a clever fellow, murmured Athos. And now you are assembled, gentlemen, stated D'Artagnan. Allow me to offer you my apologies. At this word, apologies, a cloud passed over the brow of Athos. A hearty smile curled the lip of Porthos, and a negative signal was the reply of Aramis. You do not understand me, gents, stated D'Artagnan, throwing up his head, the pointy and ambitious traces of which were at the moment gilded by means of a vivid ray of the sun. I asked to be excused in case I must no longer be able to discharge my debt to all three. For Monsieur Athos has the right to kill me first, which should an awful lot lessen the face pride of your invoice, Monsieur Porthos, and render yours almost null, Monsieur Aramis. And now, gentlemen, I repeat, excuse me, however on that account best, and on defend. At those words, with the most gallant air feasible, D'Artagnan drew his sword. The blood had established to the head of D'Artagnan, and at that moment he would have drawn his sword in opposition to all of the Musketeers in the state as willingly as he now did in opposition to Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. It turned into a quarter beyond midday, the solar became in its zenith, and the spot chosen for the scene of the duel was exposed to its complete ardor. "It may be very warm," stated Athos, drawing his sword in its turn, "but I cannot take off my doublet, for I just now felt my wound start to bleed again, and I need to not like to annoy Monsieur with the sight of blood which he has no longer drawn from me himself." "That is proper, Monsieur," replied D'Artagnan, "and whether drawn by myself or another, I guarantee you I shall constantly view with regret the blood of so brave a gentleman. I will consequently combat in my doublet, like yourself." "Come, come, sufficient of such compliments!" cried Porthos. "Remember, we are awaiting our turns." "Speak for yourself while you are inclined to utter such incongruities," interrupted Aramis. "For my part, I suppose what they are saying may be very properly stated, and pretty worthy of gentlemen." "When you please, monsieur," said Athos, placing himself on protect. "I waited your orders," stated D'Artagnan, crossing swords. But scarcely had the two rapiers clashed, while the agency of the guards of his Eminence, commanded via M. de Jussac, turned the corner of the convent. "The cardinal's guards!" cried Aramis and Porthos at equal time. "Seize your swords, gents! Seize your swords!" So they are ready to fight, and then the cardinal's guards jump in the place where they were fighting, and because it's illegal, they're kind of like, no, like hide what you are doing. But it became too late. The two warring parties have been seen in a function which left no question in their intentions. "Hello!" cried Jussac, advancing closer to them, and creating a sign to his guides to do so likewise. "Hello, Musketeers! Fighting right here, are you? And the edicts? What is become of them?" "You are very generous, gentlemen of the guards," stated Athos, full of rancor, for Jussac changed into one of the aggressors of the previous day. "If we had been to see you fighting, I can assure you that we would make no effort to save you. Leave us by myself, then, and you will revel in a little enjoyment without cost to yourselves." "Gentlemen," stated Jussac, "it smiles with brilliant regret that I pronounce the factor impossible. Duty before the whole lot. Sheath, then, in case you please, and observe us." "Monsieur," said Aramis, parodying Jussac, "it would come up with the money for us amazing satisfaction to obey your well-mannered invitation if it depended upon ourselves. However, lamentably the thing is not possible. Monsieur de Tréville has forbidden it. Pass in your way, then. It's miles the best factor to do. This raillery exasperated Jussac. We will price upon you then, stated he, in case you disobey. There are 5 of them, said Athos half aloud, and we're however 3. We will be overwhelmed once and more, and ought to die immediate, for, on my component, I declare I will never appear once more earlier than the captain as a conquered man. Athos, Porthos, and Aramis immediately drew near each other, while Jussac drew up his quadris. This quick becomes sufficient to determine D'Artagnan on the element he became to take. It became one of those events which decide the life of a person. It became a choice between the king and the cardinal. The selection made, it must be continued in. To fight, that turned into to disobey the regulation, that turned into risk his head, that was to make at one blow an enemy of a minister greater powerful than the king himself. All this the young guy perceived, and yet to his reward we talked it. He did now not hesitate, turning toward Athos and his pal. "Gentlemen," said he, "permit me to accurate your phrases, if you please. You said you were, however, 3. However, it seems to me we are 4." "But you are not one fox," stated Porthos. "That's real," spoke back D'Artagnan. "I have no longer the uniform, but I even have the spirit. My heart is that of a musketeer. I experience it, monsieur, and that impels me on." "Withdraw, younger man!" cried Jussac, who, doubtless by his gestures and the expression of his countenance, had guessed D'Artagnan's design. "You may retire, we consent to that. Save your pores and skin. Begone quick!" D'Artagnan did now not budge. "Decidedly, you're a brave fellow," stated Athos, urging the younger guy's hand. "Come, come, select your component," replied Jussac. "Well," stated Porthos to Aramis, "we need to do something." "Monsieur is full of generosity," said Athos. But all 3 contemplated upon the teens of D'Artagnan and dreaded his inexperience. "We must most effective be 3, certainly one of whom is wounded, with the addition of a boy," resumed Athos. But it will now not be the less said we were 4 guys." Yes, but to yield," stated Porthos. "That is hard," spoke back Athos. D'Artagnan comprehended their irresolution. "Try me, gents," said he, "and I swear to you, via my honor, that I will no longer go subsequently if we're conquered." "What is your name, my courageous fellow?" said Athos. "D'Artagnan, monsieur." "Well, then, Athos, Porthos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan. Forward!" cried Athos. "Come, gents, have you made a decision?" said Jussac for the third time. "It is carried out, gents," said Athos. "And what's your preference?" asked Jussac. "We are about to have the honor of charging you," responded Aramis, lifting his hat with one hand and drawing his sword with the other. "Ah, you resist, do you?" cried Jussac. Does that astonish you?" And the 9 warring parties rushed upon each other with a fury which, however, did now not exclude a short diploma of technique. Athos, constant upon a certain Cahusac, had faith of the cardinals. Porthos had Bicarat, and Aramis observed himself adverse to 2 adversaries. As to D'Artagnan, he sprung toward Jussac himself. The coronary heart of the young Gascon beat as if it burst through his side, no longer from worry, God be thanked. He had not the shade of it. However, with emulation, he fought like a livid tiger, turning 10 times round his adversary, and converting his ground and his defence 20 times. Jussac turned into, as was stated, an excellent blade, and had had a whole lot practice. However, it required all his ability to guard himself towards an adversary who, energetic, departed every immediately from obtained policies, attacking him on all sides straight away, and yet parrying like a man who had the best respect for his very own demise. This contest, a duration exhausted Gisac's staying power. Furious at being held in test via one whom he had taken into consideration a boy, he had become warm and started to make mistakes. D'Artagnan, who, though looking in practice had a valid idea, redoubled his agility. Jussac tensed to place a quid to this, springing ahead, aimed a horrible thrust at his adversary, but the latter parried it, and while Jussac became convalescing himself, glided like a serpent underneath his blade, and surpassed his sword through his frame. Jussac fell like a dead mass. D'Artagnan then solid a disturbing and fast glance over the sector of struggle. Aramis had killed one of his adversaries. However, the other pressed him warmly. Nevertheless, Aramis turned into an awesome situation and able to protect himself. Bicarat and Porthos had simply made counter-hits. Porthos had acquired a thrust through his arm, and Bicarat one through his thigh. But neither of those two wounds became severe, and that the best fought greater earnestly. Athos, wounded anew by means of Cahusac, became certainly paler, but did no longer give a way foot. He only modified his sword hand, and fought along with his left hand. According to the legal guidelines of duelling at that duration, D'Artagnan was at liberty to assist whom he pleased. While he was endeavoring to find out which of his companions stood in greatest want, he caught a look from Athos. The look became of elegant eloquence. Athos might have died in place of enchantment for help, but he made want to appearance, and with that appearance asked assistance. D'Artagnan interpreted it. With a terrible shudder he sprang to the face of Cahusac, crying, "To me, Monsieur Guardsman! I will slay you!" Cahusac it became time for Athos, whose notable courage alone supported him, sunk upon his knee. "'Sblood!" cried he to D'Artagnan, "do not kill him, young man, I beg of you. I have a vintage affair to settle with him when I am cursed and sound once more. Disarm him handiest, make certain of his sword. That's it, very properly done." The exclamation began drove from Athos with the aid of seeing the sword of Cahusac fly 20 paces from him. D'Artagnan and Cahusac sprung forward on the identical on the spot, the one to get better, the alternative to attain. The sword, but D'Artagnan, being the greater active, reached it first and placed his foot upon it. Cahusac, without delay, ran to the guardsman who Aramis had killed, seized his rapier, and returned towards D'Artagnan. But on his way he met Athos, who, for the duration of his confirm which D'Artagnan had procured him, had recovered his breath, and who, for worry that D'Artagnan could kill his enemy, needed to renew the fight. D'Artagnan perceived that it might be disobliging Athos no longer to depart him alone, and in a couple of minutes Cahusac fell, with a sword thrust via his throat. At the same on the spot, Aramis located his sword factor at the breast of his fallen enemy, and compelled him to invite for mercy. Their handiest then remained Porthos and Bicarat. Porthos made a thousand prospers, asking Bicarat what o'clock it may be, and offering him his compliments upon his brother's having simply received an organization in the regiment of Navarre. However, jest as he might, he gained nothing. Bicarat became one of those iron guys who by no means fell dead. Nevertheless, it became important to finish. The watch would possibly arise and take all of the fighters, wounded or no not, royalists or cardinalists. Athos, Aramis, and D'Artagnan surrounded Bicarat and required him to surrender. Though alone in opposition to all, and with a wound in his thigh, Bicarat needed to hold out, but Jussac, who had risen upon his elbow, cried out to him to yield. Bicarat turned into a Gascon as D'Artagnan turned into. He became a deaf ear, and contented himself with laughing, and between parries, finding time to factor to a niche of earth with his sword. "Here," cried he, parodying a verse of the Bible, "right here will Biccarat die, for I handiest am left, and there are searching for my life." "But there are four towards you. Go away off, I command you." "Ah, in case you command me, that's any other factor," said Bicarat. "As you are my commander, it is my duty to obey." And springing backward, he broke his sword across his knee to avoid the necessity of surrendering it, threw the potions over the convent wall, and crossed his hands, whistling a cardinalist air. Bravery is usually reputable, even in an enemy. The musketeers saluted Bicarat with their swords, and backed them to their seats. D'Artagnan did the equal. Then, assisted by Bicarat, the best one left status, they bore Jussac, Cahusac, and one in every of Aramis' adversaries who was only wounded, below the porch of the convent. The fourth, as we stated, turned into dead. They then rang the bell, and carrying away 4 souls out of 5, they took their street, intoxicated with pleasure, in the direction of the inn of Monsieur de Tréville. They walked arm in arm, occupying the complete width of the street, and taking in every musketeer they met, in order that in the long run it became a triumphal march. The coronary heart of D'Artagnan swam in delirium. He marched along Athos and Porthos, pressing them tenderly. "If I am not but a musketeer," stated he to his new pals, and as he exceeded through the gateway of Monsieur de Tréville's inn, "as a minimum, I actually have entered upon my apprenticeship, haven't I?" So yes, they encounter some cardinal people, and they fought against them because that's what you do when you're a guard in the King's Guard. And they won, so they came back, all friends with each other, and they came back to the Musketeer headquarters at Monsieur de Tréville's hotel. And yes, that's how D'Artagnan starts the friendship between D'Artagnan and the Three Musketeers starts. And then he's kind of, yeah, an apprenticeship. It's kind of an apprenticeship, yes. I'm going to stop here for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will come back with the coming with the next chapter, which is chapter 6, um, where I think we will meet the king in this one, and we'll see. I'm still not super satisfied with the translation. There are words. It feels like it was automatically made, so it's a bit complicated English. I don't, but there are words like I'm like definitely this is not a proper translation. Um, I ca- I had to jump into something. Suddenly, it was written C plus programming, so I'm like definitely that's not the proper translation. I don't know who reviewed it. It's an official ebook that I'm taking, so I'm really surprised that this translation is that bad. Um, when I read it in French, it was not very difficult. French is just a big book, but the French itself is not very difficult. Um, so I'm a bit surprised that the English version is so complicated to read. The only negative point is even in the French version is that the sentences are very long. Like the sentences is like sometimes half a page, and it's difficult to read out loud. But yeah, I see. That's the translation I have is better than the first one I used to read at the very beginning. So far, I think I will keep doing with this one for a while. Thank you very much for watching, and see you again in another video. Bye.